Yeah, just following on from what what Justine just said there, she's built up that based on, as I said, her experience in terms of going through sites and what we have seen. The important thing that I do want to bring out to everybody is that, as I said, human factors is holistic. It's not one of the unfortunate things that a lot of us face here is that we are all in the, the OPEX side of life. And a lot of these things are built in right from the very get-go. So it's not just the systems that we're talking about in terms of maintenance or anything like that. It's holistic ideas, thinking about the design process, the purchasing processes, the actual specs processing, all that sort of stuff. It has intimate effects all the way through and cascades all the way through. We've all been in that circumstance where somebody way back when has acquired something that is a complete dog. And they've thrown it over the fence to, us operators, and we've then had to deal with the mess. This is about part of that. This is all about part of those sort of things. But also is, as Justine said, there's also the detail about, that everybody has a different level and different approach in terms of what's going on at the moment. And our mission here is to try and normalise and bring everybody up together and standardise effectively and normalise what we're actually trying to do. Okay, so thanks, Justine. And so, all right, this is Zoe Nation from the Principal Human Factors and HOP Consultant, HF Integration. There she's hiding. Zoe started out in human factors in the UK and Sydney, consulting across rail, oil and gas and the aviation world. She spent 10 years as Chevron's human factors and performance advisor for their Australian business unit. She's helped develop their global strategy for human and organisational performance, which shifted the organisation's approach to human failure. She's focused on educating leadership in HOP concepts, coordinating the learning teams program for Australia and changing the way they engage with their workforce to solve problems and improve safety outcomes. Now she works with various companies to help them learn from their own people and apply some of the tried and tested human factors and HOP approaches she believes improves trust, engagement, safety at work. I've dealt with Zoe a number of times and it's been an absolute pleasure. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. So handing over, Zoe.
Okay, thank you. So I have good news and bad news today. I guess I'll start with the bad news, right? That's normally what you do. So this implementation or application is not quick. It's not easy. It's not a program. It's not off the shelf. It's not standardized. You can't just get it from somewhere. Don't necessarily know when you're done. We don't necessarily know anyone who is there. It's really hard to measure too. So yeah, maybe I should just leave now. It's a bit depressing, but the good news is it is not a program, okay? So it's not another initiative, it's not another rollout. It is also something that you don't have to start from scratch with. So you'll, like Justine said, you'll be doing a lot of this stuff already. A lot of the expertise you need to make this work are within your organizations already. And there's a lot of good resources out there that can help you. And it means you don't have to throw out what you're already doing, okay? So there's good news and bad news, right? It depends on how you look at it. So I guess over my sort of experience working for an operator and then working with different organizations before and after my time at Chevron, I've seen human factors applied in lots of different ways. And generally, these elements are common to a successful outcome. So if you look at these, they're not really any different to the sort of elements that you would see in a normal change management plan, really. These particular ones come from a lady called Andrea Baker. So I definitely recommend looking her up. She's amazing, does some great work and a lot of freely available resources. But I guess I wanted to try and help just by talking about how this works in practice with some examples. So I've tried to group them into a bit of a staged approach, but you can really start anywhere. And you'll keep coming back to them, and you'll probably need to spend some time taking one step forward and two steps back a lot of the time, right? So the first thing I would say is that we love to fix things, right? So people love to fix. We love to jump to solve the problem. That's what we're wired for. So this is the hard part of this process, that we need to spend a bit of time upfront learning first before we jump into making a plan, okay, which is hard for us to stomach. And I'm not going to, like Steve and Justine had talked about, I'm not going to sort of sell the why, but these are generally the outcomes that I've seen in multiple examples when we do this right. So the first place I'd recommend starting, if I had to, is the leader commitment piece, okay? So a leader, it doesn't have to be a really senior leader, it doesn't have to be your top executive, but it needs to be someone who's got quite a lot of influence and people respect, and they're going to be able to convince some people of some of the things we're talking about. And that there are different drives for what kind of triggers this change or this question around, I want to do something different, okay? So that can range from your worst case scenario, like a fatality or a serious incident, where you're kind of, it's a bit of a wake-up call. And it might be an external influence that forces you to change. But it can also be from the data that you're getting. So you often will hear leaders going, I'm seeing our incident rates plateau. Why are we getting repeat incidents? Why are my root causes always people don't follow procedures? People aren't recognizing the risk. Why can't people just follow the procedures? So when you start to hear some of those questions, that's your in. Okay, that's the way you can start going, okay, they're interested in doing something different. The other part to remember here is they don't know what they don't know, okay? So sometimes I'll get asked, oh, you do human factors. That means you can come in and you can teach our people how to make less mistakes. And you can educate them, and I'll just put you straight in with our workforce. It's great, go and fix them. That is not what this is about, and hopefully I don't need to sell that to any of you. But it's still kind of an excuse to start the conversation, okay? And that's where the next step's really important, the education piece. So look at all these terms, and I can add another 20 onto there, okay? These are some of the things that we start talking about that you'll see certain consultants selling or different ideas. And I guess the education piece is really important to make sure that we are on the same page for your particular organization, for that particular journey that you want to take. So I'll come back to this, but for the purpose of today, just so we're clear. So if you look at this quote from Reason, we cannot change the human condition, but we can change the conditions under which humans work. You know, we know Reason has done a lot of research in human error. He's kind of like, you know, all of our idols in that sort of space. And he's really saying that behavior is not your only tool in the box, okay? So the idea is, we're not saying that that all of our behavioral-based programs are bad or that you have to throw them out. So they serve a purpose, right? We want to have people talking about behavior, about the expected safety behaviors. We want it to be important at the front of people's minds, of course. But it's trying to say, don't spend all of your time, effort, and money focusing on those programs, because it will only get you so far. There are certain things about the human condition that we can't change. And more recently, we're seeing some movements around this kind of HOP, safety differently, and I'll talk a bit about that. But so Todd Conklin, another person, if you haven't read his books or looked him up, podcast, brilliant source of new ideas and how we're evolving our approach to safety. He simply describes it, fix the work, not the worker. So, and Justine was describing it too, we're looking at the systems, taking a systems approach. So keep that always front and center, because it's quite misleading having the word human in that title. A lot of the time people are like, humans, yes, fix the humans, but it's the exact opposite. So the car industry have given us a perfect example of this. They spend a lot of their time and effort focusing on accepting people are going to crash. So what are some of the things that are in place in a car that expect a car to crash and therefore protect them once they do? Shatner. Seatbelt, airbags, yeah, ABS. So they build a car knowing it will crash. Until we remove the human, it's going to crash, right? Equally, I just this week, so at school, you probably have the same policy, no hat, no play, right? The sun comes out and you're not allowed to go outside unless you have a hat. And so you can see this behavior even in kids, you know, our kids are sort of 5 and 7. And so they come to playtime and they go to get their hats and lo and behold, their hat's not on the hook and it's missing, and they kind of look around and everyone starts rushing out to play. And so they've got a choice. Either they can go and sit inside and wait for the playtime and watch their friends out the window play, or they can do what? ignore it, or take someone else's hat. I'm glad it's not just my kids, because I was like, oh no, teach them to break the rules. So, this rule breaking and error proneness of humans, it's the way we're wired, okay? So you've got to keep coming back to that. And I think if I just skip back, I think that's the right button. So the education piece is really important if you decide that you want to embark on doing something about human factors and improving your human performance. There are lots of resources out there. I would spend time looking externally, and I'm not trying to say me, I'm saying Todd Conklin, Andrea Baker, Provan and Ray, Griffith University, Decker, some of the great resources that free online training, like from the Energy Institute and the Human Performance Oil and Gas, newly sort of formed group that have got some great resources on there. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do. And I think getting comfortable with some of these different terms and what you want to call it or not call it is one of the key things. Otherwise, it really causes confusion. And there's still confusion all the time. Like, it's so ironic that we're trying to make stuff easier to use, and yet we have this discussion almost every time I'm talking about what I do, okay? Okay, so this really is basically the same as what you see on the card that Justine has given you, okay? So just to clarify, human factors are human and organizational factors. The O was added to make it less human, and to sort of highlight that we talk about organizations' influence on humans, okay? We are looking at improving the interface. So anything that people interact with, what can we use about what we know about humans, their capabilities, their physical size, their mental processing? How can we design the system better, whatever that might be? And Justine talked through some of those examples, right? It's an established science. There's lots of tools that exist out there, expertise, proven research. Now, you can use some great tools in there, but if you do not have a culture or an environment that is set up to be a psychologically safe environment and somewhere where it's okay to talk about failure, including violations and rule breaking, then you're going to be limited into how much impact you can have with some of these tools. So I'll give you an example. We applied with one company I worked with, we applied a human factors investigation tool, and it was a great tool. It had great analysis capability. It broke down the human errors. It looked for system causes. But at the end of the day, if we go and do that and a leader turns around reviewing the incident report or instantly following the reaction when the banner goes out and we see what the incident's about, if their reaction is, find out who did this, it's obvious that they didn't follow the procedure, they should have known better, everyone knows you don't break that rule, that is going to shut down the conversation, and you're going to hear less about the work and the errors that are happening all the time. So this part, I'll just keep using this button. So this part, and those principles that are on the back of this card, they look simple, but they're actually really hard to get your head around. And this is challenging some of the stuff and some of the traditional approaches that we've had to safety. Particularly spend a lot of time on number two. That could be a whole presentation on its own. But the idea is that these two, their outcomes are the same, all right? We want people to succeed at work. We want them to fail safely. We understand they fail, and we want to, when it's critical for them to fail safely, you can't do this with everything. As Justine said, you need to prioritize your critical activities, otherwise you would go broke. Okay. So we move on to the operational learning. So where do you start? And Justine gave you some great starters, right? That using the data you have already. So you have varying levels of whether it's good or bad, depending on your system. You have your existing incident investigation data. You know the patterns that you've got and the trends, and you can look at that. You can use the survey data. You can understand what the gaps are from the people and surveys that you already have existing. You can use performance data, so the people's interaction with the control room, for example. You can use that to understand where the workload is heavy, for example, and where you might need to look at that. But I guess the best source absolutely is the people that are already working for you and are closest to the work. So I would propose that this is the way we typically manage change. So we would decide that we have a new process or system, and we want to sort of do human factors. And we go, okay, well, we've got some experts, and I've been working in this field for 20 years, and I know all there is to know about this particular activity. So I'm going to create this great process, and I'm going to give it to the guys doing the work, chuck it over the wall at them, and they're going to just make it work. And they're going to have to balance that with and juggle that with all of their already competing things that they've got going on. Okay, it's additive. It's adding again. It's like, here you go, guys. It's another initiative to roll out. What's the reaction? I mean, it varies, but generally the reaction when you say, we've got another rollout, we've got another issue of this. I've seen a lot of eye rolling and concern and change fatigue. You know, it's a lot. We're asking a lot of our people all the time without taking away. So the idea is to try and have a more collaborative approach. Guess what? It's not the quickest or the easiest way to do it, but it definitely is a more sustainable change. So I'll give you an example. We had a company that was looking to roll out a new permit system, and they had designed the permit system at the corporate level. And so they sort of, again, we've got experience in this, we've got permitting experts who designed it, we're going to go and roll it out. And at the same time, we were trying to look at doing something around HOP and human factors. So we said, well, let's try and take a different approach. Let's try and see if we can do this. So we pulled in some people from the field. So from various sites, we pulled in maintainers and production crews. And we said, okay, we want to talk about how you permit work. And so they said, okay, well, here's the manual. This is how we permit work. And we said, no, we don't want to see the manual. So what they were trying to show us is the black line. So when we design a procedure, a policy, a plan, we take a lot of time and we risk assess it. We involve some subject matter experts. We hopefully involve the end user a bit. And we come up with the way we think work should be done to be safe and productive. If you stick to that, nothing will go wrong. But of course, what we found after talking to people in these workshops, that was not what they were doing. So we basically just said, tell us on, the day you get to work, what do you do in terms of permitting? And so they started talking. And not only were they deviating from the line, but the other sites were deviating in different ways. Okay, so they're taking shortcuts or innovating, depending on which way you look at it. And the interesting thing was the reaction from some of the supervisors we had in the room. Okay, so they'd sort of go, that's not the way you do it. That should not be done. Look, I can see it in the manual here. You're doing that wrong. And equally from the guys from the other side, they're sort of saying, oh, we don't do it like that there. You're doing that wrong. And we kind of sort of had to stop and say, this is gold. Because when do you normally talk about this kind of move away from the plans or procedures? When do you normally find out about it? Incidents, right? Something goes wrong, okay? Something goes wrong and we get hyper-focused and go, wait a minute, we're not following procedures. But actually the guys are telling us before anything had happened, this is going on all the time. And why is it going on? Because that's how they can get the job done, because the plan and the procedure didn't take into account that John's off sick that day, or that we've changed the requirements or the equipment's down, or that there's actually physically not enough time to do that job because the equipment's behaving differently to how we expected, or that the downloading of the certification templates is taking forever, so we're just copying and pasting our isolations instead of doing them from scratch. All this kind of stuff, which you'll be familiar with. So this is the key. This is probably in the past, we've described this as the normalization of deviation. Does that sound like a good thing to you? It's like duh, 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 music in the background, okay? This is not a good thing, but this is just the variability of work. So if you do nothing else to start with, because it's daunting, right? There's a bunch of stuff. There's a huge range of things you can do in human factors. But if you do nothing else, but just go out, one site, micro experiment, don't worry about doing a company-wide thing, just start small and go to one site and say, hey, instead of, in your safety walkarounds or your leadership engagements in the field that you need to do in a certain amount of time that you need to spend in the field, if you're going with a leader, instead of asking those questions around, show me where you're compliant, I want to check your JHA, and we start to ask slightly different questions, then you'll get different responses. But you do need to create that psychologically safe environment to do that, okay? So I'll give you an example. I was in a workshop with a bunch of maintainers, and we were talking about what gets in your way in terms of safety. So when does safety get in the way of you doing your job, basically? And we started talking about JHAs. And they said, you know, one of the supervisors said, it's really frustrating. I've got certain teams that I trust and I work with. I'm out in the field all the time. I see them, I see their work. I go out and have conversations with them, and they're experienced guys and they know what they're doing. I don't want them to write a perfect 12-step detailed JHA. I'm happy with a 4-step JHA that covers the hazards and the main controls. As long, my main concern is that I want to see the conversation, the eyeballing, the engagement, and people all understanding that. So that's what he's looking for. And so one of his supervisors in the room said, well, we're empowering you to do that. That's fine. That's what we want you to do. Absolutely. As a leader, you have some wiggle room, okay? But his response was, well, in the past, I've been burned because I've done that. And I've tried to say, I'm more concerned about the conversation than the detail of the JHA. But I've had leaders come out and check the JHA. The first thing they do, go and pick up the JHA. I've had HES come out, pick up the JHA, and line after line, and I've been crucified for it in front of my crews, or my crews come to me and go, you checked this and told us it was okay. And so that creates that fear, hiding it. And we kind of get tied up with the paperwork. And this is where we have to start having some honest conversations. So trying to do this stuff and create that environment where we're honest is difficult, because we are saying, how safe does a JHA keep you? How safe is a piece of paper? We've used that in the past to kind of say, well, if you do that, you're safe. And we have to be honest and say, well, that's an administrative control. And what do we know about humans and routine tasks? So it gets you into this kind of space. You need to be prepared to have these conversations. And this is where the cycle of education comes, because you're going to get sticky questions, sticky concerns, and you want to come back to them. Okay. So at this stage, if you've got a bit of leadership commitment, you've started aligning on what it is you're doing, even just locally, and you've started to go out and find what people are saying you should focus on. And by the way, I will say, well, I'll give you an example of it, but this by then should give you sort of narrow it down a bit, and this will help to feed into your plan. So now you've got a bit more of a clear case for change, okay? And we understand a bit more about our own maturity. And we can use our self-assessment tools and the good stuff that that Demirs have produced as well to feed into this. So an example, a particular contractor that I was working with wanted to do something different. Their trigger was that they were having repeat events of injuries and potentially serious injuries, but the problem was that they were hiding them. So they found a couple of occasions when the guys were not reporting them, or were kind of trying to get on with the job and not reporting a shoulder injury or whatever. So there was a few concerns around there, and there was a bit of change going on in the organization at the time. So we'd done a few sessions around educating what these ideas were, and they sort of said, oh, maybe there's something in there. Maybe we should try that. So the operations manager said, all right, I'm willing to give this a go. So all we did is we went out to the site, one site that they're working at, it's a huge company, but one site that they work at with a small group of the contractors, and just had a bit of an intro from the leadership saying, look, we're trying to learn a bit. We know that we need to do something different. We can see this repeat instance. So we need your help, and we want you to be honest, and we're not going to be in the room when you have these conversations. Okay, so they leave the room, and we just met in the crib room, or, having a coffee informally. And it was myself and someone from the organization. So it's a bit of a mixture of an external person and internal. And you can judge it, your own organizational relationship, but sometimes it helps to have someone that's not in. I would say definitely don't have someone that's in the line, but sometimes it helps to have someone outside. Sometimes just having someone from a different part of the organization is enough. And we just started asking them some of those questions around what was the hardest part of the work they did, what kind of error traps were going on for them in their work. And there was a bit of skepticism about this approach. It was like, oh God, you're just going to get a bucket list, aren't you? You're just going to get venting and whining. And surprisingly, really spent very little time on that. In fact, the guys just really wanted to talk about the high risk stuff and the stuff that was really concerning them, stressing them out. So they raised loads of different examples, and we allocated those based on risk. So you can still do quite an objective analysis of the data that you get if you need that to try and justify and move forward. But the key was we were getting things like the administrative process just to order basic safety equipment. So they're all bringing in their own makeshift safety equipment and PPE because they have to go through sort of 4 sign-offs to get it. And this is a dirty job. They needed the PPE. Out of date standard working procedures, and a feeling that, and examples where HR's reaction to incidents have been pretty bad. And there were examples of people just being removed off site, just disappearing quietly off site, with no real explanation. So there was a bit of fear going on. So you start to understand why people weren't reporting. They sort of said that they didn't have any engagement with their leadership. So when the leaders and managers did come onto site, it was kind of like they were ignored. They didn't talk to them. They weren't approachable and they weren't approached. So we gathered a bunch of stuff, and it was quite confronting for the leadership. It was difficult because they were expecting us to come back with things like lack of competency, they're complacent, they're poorly motivated, they need some training. But actually, it was the leadership. They needed to take a little bit of a look and go, is this the environment you want to create? Do you realize the effect that some of your actions are having? And plus, we came back with some tangible examples and ways to fix some of the safety critical equipment as well. They'd been thinking long and hard about it. So this wasn't a slow process. You know, nothing is in sight, right? You want to check and cover different swings. And so we did that over a period of about 18 months. And we built an improvement plan, and we involved the guys and checked in with them and kept going back and saying, how's the improvements working from your point of view? And it also involved the leadership going on some training around more of this in-depth stuff around their leadership approach. And then it ended with sort of the leadership going on site and basically saying, drawing a line and saying that we don't want to do, we acknowledge that this is the behavior that we were showing, and therefore that's the results we were getting, and this is our role, and we're going to change, and we are sorry, and what we need you to do. So it's identifying what their role were as leadership and the role that they needed the workforce to have. And so you ended up with, you know, amazing levels of improved engagement and motivation, but also the safety performance did improve as well. So that's the kind of, if you walk through it, that's just one site. And then of course, it means that that plan became part of their broader safety improvement plan. This wasn't, yes, we started out with some actions, but that was integrated into their broader plan, okay? So this is kind of important. You may need initially to have a separate human factors plan or HOT plan, but I'd really encourage you longer term to find where this fits into your longer term vision, goals, and your company and what your safety management system is. So this means looking for maybe just tweaking the language, or the next time you're getting an update, trying to change the language in your safety management system, just tweaking it slightly around the way that you respond to failure. So other things like aligning with updates. So our opportunity was with a new permitting system came in, and we said, let's try something a bit different. So it's not necessarily a push. It's looking for opportunities just to slot in, updating your incident investigation process. When you do that, there's lots of things you can do to integrate some change in the way that you train your facilitators, the way that you investigate, how you involve the end user. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do. The main thing really here is that you're keeping people at the center, right? So when we talk about tools and doing, that can become a bit of a black box to people. People are like, what is it you're actually going to do though? Apart from just talking about it and just leadership and soft skills. There's like a bunch of tools and approaches and analysis. And for those who love numbers, there's ways of, you know, we can use task analysis, we can use error analysis. There's great guidance around how to write a good procedure, what makes a procedure more user-friendly. And there's things like learning teams as well, a really powerful tool. But even before a learning team, just involving the end user, the involved person as a full team member is a huge step and makes a massive difference as long as you set up somewhere safe for them to do that. The other thing, again, to look at, what can you stop doing? So you're always asking, what are we doing too much of? What can we stop doing? We need to remove that burden. And so when we start talking about, okay, so what's the point? What we're moving towards? How do we know when we're getting there? Like I said at the start, you might never be there. But this is not about throwing out all this, the way that we've approached human factors and safety in the past. It's just about evolving and continuous improvement and what we're learning about these complex systems that we work in. And so some of the ideas, oh, you can't even see the top. That's terrible. Can you? So if you can't see it, can you see the top line? So the top line says people are the problem. That's kind of our old view. And we're moving to people are the problem solvers. And so the idea was if people could just follow procedures, if people could just be more aware of their hazards, instead we're trying to say they're going to solve our problems. So telling them what to do, it was kind of like, I'm going to be authoritative, I'm the boss, I need to know all the answers. Instead, it's quite humbling to say, well, I am the manager, but I'd rather you told me how to fix it because I don't have all the answers. We tend to focus on trying to look at saying that we're safe if we have no incidents. And that's a whole other presentation in itself. But instead, we're starting to look at, well, we should investigate successful work too. We are mostly successful in our work, and yet we make mistakes and break rules all the time, and there's variability all the time. So why aren't we looking at all of those learning opportunities? We get hyper-focused in just the one time when one thing changed and it went wrong. There's lots of opportunity to look at successful work. That's a bit of a shift. The safety work. So I'd argue that if we get over proceduralized, bogged down in the detail of a DHA, produce another checklist, throw another tool, that's safety work for the sake of it. Is it actually changing the outcome of our work in terms of safety? So it's trying to look at that instead, what's actually adding value. And we have to have some honest conversations and let go of some of our sort of security blankets a lot of the time. And then the last one is the idea that all injuries are preventable. So I did say, I think at the start that, or maybe I didn't, that you won't get error to zero. So you won't get injuries to zero either. And that's really hard to stomach. So the idea is we want to build capacity to fail safely when it counts. If we focus on everything and all of our injuries, we physically can't do that. We've got limited resources and we can only focus on certain things. So we should be focusing on the high risk activities, the stuff that gets people really, life-changing injuries. No one wants anyone to get injured, of course, but this is a hard conversation and a bit of a shift for us in the industry. Okay, so just to finish off, I guess, and summarize. Again, elements of these might exist. You might be doing some of these things already. But I guess to again remind you about the importance of the leader commitment. I really would say don't start without this at some level. And I and some of the people that I work with have kind of all been exposed to that horrible feeling when you realize that you've maybe gone too far too quickly. So we ran a workshop. It was a learning team, but we ran a workshop after a series of events where there was an inspection task. And it was very heavily reliant on people, and we kept sort of letting stuff through, and it was kind of like, what's going on? Come on, these are highly skilled people. Can't they just get it right? And so we said, oh, well, we can do a learning team. We can go and ask them. Who knows the job better than them? And they're like, yeah, that sounds good. So we went and they stood at the beginning and said, yeah, there's no blame, no repercussions, be honest. So they were, and we got all this great stuff, right? We got amazing, again, some really practical equipment stuff that they could do, just the use of radios. But we also got some stuff around if they missed something, there was like a notification that went out and everyone saw it. It was like a name and shame thing. And then we started talking a little bit about blame and some of the response to failure. And so we had that up as well and had it on the wall. And the leadership came in and the reaction was awful. And that still gives me shivers. Basically, they sort of said, how dare you? My door is always open. And how dare you not bring this to me before now? This is your responsibility. You're accountable for your safety and you should have been bringing this to me now. And so you can imagine that the guys in the room are just sinking into their chairs, looking at me going, what have you done? And so that was, that's awful. And that's happened on numerous occasions. And that wasn't their fault. We hadn't prepared them. We hadn't educated them on some of this stuff and kind of got them to commit to what not blaming and learning really means, because it's easier said than done. So I would caution you to really try and do that, really to protect your people and yourselves as well, because otherwise you will really become quite exhausted with it. So yeah, we are going to be challenging thinking, and you're also going to build champions as well. So Justine mentioned it, but you'll soon find who the different champions in your organization are. Educate, use multiple resources. I would say try to look long-term at developing your own material. So your leadership development material that HR produces, start putting that information into there as well. Because you want to own it, it wants to be kind of embedded, and you don't want to necessarily identify that it is HOP or human factors. It just wants to be the way we do things around here. Operational learning, the main thing is really engaging with the people that do the work. Give them credit, stay humble, ask them questions. The planning part, as I said, build on the existing systems that you've got, the existing plans and the visions, and try to integrate it as much as possible. And beware of silos as well. This isn't just an H&S thing. This needs to involve other parties like legal, HR, and ideally line-led. Easier said than done again, but involving operations and not making this an H&S thing. And then finally, with building capacity and actually becoming more resilient, which is what we're aiming for, be wary of metrics. We like to, if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. We've been doing some really cool work with some forward-thinking organizations, and they're starting to find ways of, instead of using lagging indicators focused on getting our injury and incident rates down to 0, they're looking at things like how much effort or how many projects are we doing in increasing our safeguard from a human to a engineering safeguard. So how can we take credit for the work we are doing to build and improve our safeguards, okay? And yeah, the main thing is just to keep learning, stay open, stay humble. I'm still learning all the time. None of us have the answers. And if anyone says that they do and they've done it and they're finished, then I'd be very suspicious about that. Okay, thanks, that's all I've got.
That was awesome. Thanks, Zoe. I was sitting there thinking, whilst listening to about setting up organisations like that. One of the things for me personally is, away from this, because I can't do enough regulating, is I'm an umpire for hockey, and I teach junior umpires, and all that stuff there we just talked about was exactly how we have to teach people, because umpiring is a human factors problem. It's not a technical thing. And indeed, if you give somebody the rule book, they make the worst umpires possible. So, so it's absolutely right. And it works really, really well. So I can only encourage you.